think about your favorite building. Just, picture it in your mind for a second.
Right, get a clear image.
You aren't just thinking about the geometry or like the exact dimensions of the rooms.
No, usually not at all.
Right. You're remembering the heavy coolness of a stone floor or the acoustic dampening of thick wood paneling. Or maybe how a sharp beam of light slices through a specific pane of glass. You're remembering how the space physically feels.
Yeah, that tactile sensory experience.
Exactly. We're looking at how an architect uses a flat, two-dimensional piece of paper to communicate that rich, tactile, physical reality.
Well, it's arguably the central paradox of the whole profession, really.
Yeah.
Because, an architect doesn't actually build buildings.
Right. They just make the instructions.
Exactly. They make drawings of buildings.
Yeah.
So bridging that massive gulf between abstract lines on paper and a lived-in sensory environment, that is the ultimate test of their craft.
And to explore exactly how they pull this off, we are diving into this dense and, frankly, highly influential architectural essay titled Materiality and Texture, representing surfaces, structure, and detail.
It's a fantastic piece of source material.
It really is. So the mission today is to decode the visual shorthand architects use to essentially draw feelings. We're looking at how they move beyond pure Cartesian geometry to articulate what a space is actually made of. Its weight, its temperature, its atmosphere.
Because a building is never just a wireframe model.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the source material sets a fundamental baseline right from the start, which is that architecture is fundamentally an arrangement of physical substances. It is never experienced as pure math.
Right, and that physical substance is what the essay defines as materiality.
Right.
So even the most minimalist abstract wall is not just some theoretical plane in space. It's brick or rammed earth or cast-in-place concrete or Corten steel.
It has to be made of something.
Exactly. Materiality encompasses the presence, the innate qualities, and the expressive potential of those materials. So it dictates roughness or smoothness, thermal mass, porosity, and crucially, how a surface receives light or repels water.
And the text actually provides this brilliant thought experiment to illustrate this. So imagine a floor plane. The geometry is completely fixed, say 30 feet by 30 feet.
Okay, 30 by 30.
Now imagine that floor is made of hand-packed, locally sourced earth. The spatial volume hasn't changed at all, but that earthen floor instantly implies a specific relationship to the local climate, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It implies a reliance on manual craft, and it has the slow, heavy thermal character. Now, mentally swap that earthen floor out for highly polished, seamlessly joined Carrara marble.
The dimensions are identical, yet the phenomenological reading of the space shifts entirely.
Right.
The marble projects monumentality. It implies precision machinery, global extraction, and this much cooler, more severe atmospheric temperature.
Yeah, it feels completely different.
Or consider the tectonics of a staircase, right? A heavy timber stair communicates organic growth and a certain acoustic resonance.
Like the dull thud when you walk on it.
Yes. Whereas a folded steel stair projects industrial lightness, tension, and machine precision. It's a totally different vibe.
Which is why looking at a standard untextured CAD drawing, one that only shows the outlines and proportions, it feels inherently hollow.
It really does.
It's akin to reading the chemical breakdown of a recipe without ever tasting the food. Like, you might understand the structural assembly of the ingredients, but you completely miss the flavor profile.
That's a great analogy.
But I actually have to push back a bit on the premise of the standard architectural outline drawing here. Because if materiality carries that much sensory weight, if it literally dictates the environmental and structural performance of the space, isn't a purely geometric drawing basically intellectually dishonest?
That's an aggressive way to frame it, but...
It feels like an outline drawing is essentially a lie of omission.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the source text actually aligns with your skepticism.
Oh, really?
Yeah. To draw architecture while ignoring its materiality is to fundamentally misrepresent the reality of the building. Materiality is not just some applied cosmetic layer.
It's not just wallpaper.
Exactly. It is the genesis of the structural logic.
Yeah.
The material determines the spanning capabilities, the construction sequencing, the thermal envelope, even the acoustic reverberation.
Wow, so it dictates almost everything.
Pretty much. The identity of any architectural work relies entirely on the unbreakable alliance of form and substance.
Okay, so if the architect is obligated to communicate the truth of the building, they absolutely must represent the material texture.
They have to.
But that presents a staggering representational challenge. Like, how do you graphically translate the rugged, abrasive reality of rough-hewn stone or the slick transparency of glass onto a flat sheet of paper?
Without it turning into a complete mess, you mean?
Right, without the drawing devolving into this chaotic, over-rendered nightmare.
Well, it requires a highly disciplined graphic vocabulary. The objective isn't photorealism, which is a common misconception.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's about creating the illusion of tactile presence. Texture in a drawing acts as a set of visual cues.
Right.
It basically trains the viewer's brain on how to read the physical weight of the building.
Right.
And this is done through incredibly carefully calibrated stroke weights and line types.
Right, so the graphic language itself carries meaning. Like, if an architect wants to communicate a heavy, rustic masonry base, they don't just sit there and draw rocks.
No, that would take forever.
They use aggressive, irregular strokes, dense stippling, and broken line work. And visually, those marks carry a lot of, weight on the page.
Right, which subconsciously signals physical weight, age, and manual labor to the viewer.
Exactly. And conversely, if the design calls for a highly machined, modern aesthetic like aluminum cladding or polished plaster, the line work becomes radically sparse.
Almost invisible.
Yeah, the architect relies on sharp, continuous lines or just broad, even tonal fields to suggest a lack of friction.
It's a process of whispering tactile clues to the viewer. And the essay spends considerable time on the materials that historically frustrate architects the most.
I can guess one of them.
Glass is the classic example. I mean, how do you draw a material whose primary characteristic is transparency?
You're essentially trying to draw something defined by what it isn't. You can't exactly slap a heavy hatch pattern over a window and call it a day.
Precisely. Glass is completely visually elusive. So to render it, architects have to draw the phenomena around the glass.
Like reflections and things.
Exactly. They use minimal, razor-thin contours. They map reflected lines, maybe the ghosted reflection of the surrounding context, like a tree or the building across the street.
Oh, that makes sense.
And more importantly, they draw the interior space behind the glass, but slightly muted or distorted, just to prove that transparency exists.
Right, like those famous early perspective drawings by Mies van der Rohe for the Friedrichstrasse's skyscraper.
Oh, the charcoal ones, yes.
Yeah. He used stark charcoal to draw the dark voids of the interior and the sharp reflections of the street, but he basically let the white of the paper act as the glass itself.
It's a masterclass in implication.
And then on the complete opposite end of the tectonic spectrum, you have cast-in-place concrete, which is essentially liquid stone.
Right.
The instinct might be to render it really heavy and dark, but the text argues that concrete actually demands extreme graphic restraint.
It does. Because if you overwork the surface of concrete in a drawing, it quickly just reads as mud or this chaotic, messy aggregate.
It just looks dirty.
Right. Masterful representations of concrete. Think of the meticulous drawings coming out of Tato Ando's studio. They rely on broad, monolithic, tonal massing.
Yeah, very smooth.
The texture is suggested not by drawing the grit of the cement, but by precisely mapping the joints of the formwork, or the subtle grit of the tie holes. You define the material through the traces of its construction process.
Which actually brings up a critical question regarding the cognitive load on both the architect and the viewer. If an architect is designing a massive brick facade, they obviously aren't sitting there drafting 80,000 individual bricks.
Good Lord, no.
Doing so wouldn't just take forever. It would actually ruin the legibility of the drawing, wouldn't it?
It absolutely would. The essay frames this exact tension as abstraction versus realism. Total realism in an architectural drawing is often totally counterproductive.
Because there's just too much detail.
Exactly, it creates visual noise. When a surface is over-rendered, the eye gets trapped on the micro details and loses the macro proportion of the facade.
The brain just sees a vibrating wall of static instead of a building.
Right, so the solution is what the author terms selective truthfulness.
Selective truthfulness. I like that.
The architect relies on the viewer's gestalt perception, the brain's ability to complete a pattern based on partial information.
Oh, sure.
So to draw a brick wall, the architect establishes the modular rhythm. They might detail a small patch of the running bond near the ground plane, add a few calculated shadows where the mortar joints recede, and then...
They just let the line work fade out.
Exactly. Your brain understands the rule being established and seamlessly projects that brick texture across the rest of the blank facade.
It's brilliant. You basically provide the thesis of the material, and the viewer's imagination does the heavy lifting.
Exactly.
And this selective truthfulness applies to the context around the building, too. The text points out how vegetation, trees, shrubs, ground cover is deployed not just for landscaping, but as a critical textural counterpoint.
It's all about contrast.
Right, because plants are inherently organic, with soft, irregular, diffuse edges. When you juxtapose that messy, organic line work against the crisp, mechanical precision of a steel mullion...
The contrast makes the steel look sharper and the glass look colder.
Yes. Contrast is arguably the most powerful tool in the representational arsenal. However, and this is a big... However, relying purely on surface texture in a drawing presents a kind of representational trap.
How so?
Well, a beautiful, meticulously hatched brick elevation tells me absolutely nothing about the structural integrity of the building.
Ah, right. It's the deception of the facade.
Exactly, because in contemporary construction, that beautiful textured brick on the elevation might be a massive load-bearing masonry wall doing the actual work of holding up the roof, or it could just be a 2-inch decorative veneer, basically architectural wallpaper, clipped onto a hidden skeleton of steel studs and waterproofing membranes.
And this is where the distinction between surface treatments and structural cores becomes paramount.
Yeah.
To show the truth of the assembly, the architect has to fundamentally change the drawing type. You cannot understand the bones of a building from an elevation or a perspective. You have to literally slice the building open.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me, specifically regarding the psychological impact of graphic conventions.
Okay, lay on me.
When we look at sections or floor plans, we are looking at cut material, like an MRI scan. The architect is showing us the hidden guts of the wall, and the standard convention is to fill those sliced walls with a solid, heavy black tone known as poche.
Right, poche, derived from the French word for pocket. It is a defining characteristic of architectural drafting, tracing all the way back to the heavy India ink used in the École des Beaux-Arts.
But it's not just a stylistic flourish, is it? Flooding those cut structural walls with dense black ink creates an immediate visceral sense of mass.
Oh, absolutely.
When you look at a floor plan with heavy poche, your eye instantly understands the hierarchy of the building. You feel the unyielding weight of the concrete sheer walls.
Yes, and you can instantly distinguish them from the lightweight, transparent curtain walls that are drawn with just a single fragile line.
Exactly. The drawing literally weighs more on the page where the building weighs more in reality.
It perfectly communicates the tectonic hierarchy. So elevations map the rhythm and proportion of the exterior skin.
Right.
Perspectives provide the experiential depth and scale. But the essay makes a really compelling argument that the ultimate test of materiality happens at a much smaller scale, the detail drawing.
The detail drawing is where theory meets reality. Because you aren't looking at the sweeping, majestic form of a skyscraper.
No, you're zoomed way in.
You are looking at a hyper-focused slice of how the aluminum window frame meets the concrete sill.
It is architecture designed at the scale of human encounter. The essay notes that a detail drawing is never merely a magnified fragment of the larger plan.
It's not just zooming in.
Right. It is a rigorous defense of the building's constructability. It tests whether the macro concepts of the design actually hold up when scrutinized at the scale of touch.
It reminds me of the obsession architects like Carlo Scarpa had with details. For him, the joint wasn't just a place where two materials bumped into each other.
Right, it was an event.
Yeah, it was a place of sensory transition. A detail drawing forces the architect to confront tolerances, the realities of craftsmanship, and the physical properties of dissimilar materials expanding and contracting at different rates.
Because materials behave differently when the temperature changes.
Exactly. You can draw a pristine, floating glass box from a mile away all you want, but the detail drawing is where you have to prove how the glass is physically bolted to the floor without shattering under wind loads.
The detail resolves the tectonic logic.
Yeah.
But even if the structural logic is flawless and the texture is perfectly abstracted, there is an invisible dynamic layer that alters the perception of materiality entirely.
Oh, you mean light?
Exactly.
Because texture is functionally invisible without it. I mean, you could engineer the most beautiful, rugged stone wall in the world, but if it sits in a completely flat, unlit environment, your eyes cannot perceive the roughness.
Right, materiality and light are completely inseparable phenomena. The physical qualities of a surface are really only revealed through how they intercept illumination.
That makes total sense.
A highly polished, smooth surface reflects light continuously, creating glare and sharp highlights. But a porous or deeply textured surface absorbs light and fractures it into thousands of microshadows, which is what actually gives the material its visual depth.
So the architect isn't just drawing the physical material, they are mapping the behavior of light across that material.
That's the real trick.
Like if you want to draw a corrugated metal roof, you don't just draw parallel lines, you draw the rhythm of the light-catching ridges and the deep shadows of the valley.
Yeah. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, materiality is fundamentally relational.
Relational how?
Well, a material's perceived quality changes drastically depending on its immediate context. So, if an architect draws a pristine, frameless glass volume, the inherent smoothness and fragility of that glass are intensely magnified if it's inserted into a context of rough, crumbling, historic brickwork.
Oh, the contrast again.
Right. The glass reads as more ethereal, and the brick reads as more ancient, simply because they are forced into dialogue.
It's the manipulation of mood. The source text actually uses the term atmosphere to describe this synthesis.
Atmospheric, yes.
When an architect carefully calibrates the material texture, the shadow play, and the contextual contrast, they are actively designing an atmosphere.
Because materiality in a drawing is never just empirical data. It is profoundly psychological.
Right.
Just consider the immediate atmospheric shift between a low-ceilinged room lined in warm aromatic cedar versus a soaring courtyard enclosed by cold, board-formed concrete.
Oh, completely different feelings.
The materials themselves dictate whether the occupant feels protected, exposed, grounded, or elevated.
Which is something you can test in your own life. The next time you walk into a space that makes you feel instantly secure and relaxed, or conversely, a space that feels intimidating and austere, look past the furniture.
Yeah, look at the walls.
Look at the surfaces. The architect engineered that precise psychological reaction by choosing how those specific material textures would intercept the light. They conceptualized and drew that atmosphere long before the foundation was ever poured.
It reinforces the reality that materials are active, vocal participants in design.
They really are.
When architectural students are rigorously trained to represent materiality, they are not just learning draftsmanship. They are learning how architecture communicates through physical matter. The drawing board essentially becomes a laboratory for testing material behavior.
It completely reframes how we should look at architectural drawings. They aren't just instructional diagrams for contractors, they are an incredibly sophisticated tactile language.
Absolutely.
Through the disciplined use of line weight, selective abstraction, and the calculated mapping of light and shadow, architects literally conjure the illusion of physical mass and sensory texture out of thin air.
And a masterful drawing ensures that the wall on the page possesses the same depth, structure, and emotional resonance as the wall in reality.
It's just a fascinating translation of the physical world. And there's one final concept from the source material that completely shifts this paradigm, which I want to leave you with today.
It's a great thought to end on.
The text briefly touches on the concepts of aging and weathering. We tend to think of a building as being perfectly finished on the day the ribbon is cut. But materials are not static.
Not at all.
Wood silvers and warps, stone erodes. Copper oxidizes. If architects must anticipate how these materials will stain and weather over decades, then the architect is not the final author of the building.
Nature is.
Right. Nature and time are the final collaborators. The next time you walk past a massive bronze door that is polished bright only where thousands of hands have pushed it, or you see a copper roof bleeding a vivid green patina down a stone facade, consider how the environment is continuously drawing on those surfaces. Time itself is applying the final, unerasable layer of texture, proving that true materiality is never actually finished.